The blinding, non-stop flashing of 100 professional media cameras was hot against my face. But the psychological atmosphere inside the Grand Press Auditorium of the Grand Plaza was an absolute, sub-zero freeze. Tonight was supposed to be the international celebration gala for my husband of 4 years, Tristan Thorne. He had just been voted the global icon of the entertainment sector, securing a historic $50 million multi-year endorsement contract with the city's premier lifestyle brands. But instead of honoring the silent woman who had anchored his chaotic life from the dirt, Tristan chose this exact, multi-platform live broadcast, watched by over 10 million active viewers worldwide, to execute my absolute social and emotional liquidation. I stood dead center on the elevated stage, isolated under a blinding, humiliating white spotlight. I was wearing a simple, unbranded white cotton maternity dress and flat shoes, my left hand instinctively resting over my slightly swollen stomach, where my unborn baby boy was gently moving. In an auditorium overcrowded with elite Hollywood directors, diamond-encrusted supermodels, and predatory paparazzi, I looked like an embarrassing, lower-class intruder. A boring, penniless assistant who had somehow wandered into the playground of global idols. Tristan Thorne stood exactly 5 feet away from me behind the gold-plated main press podium. He looked breathtakingly immaculate, dressed in a custom-tailored white designer tuxedo, his platinum hair perfectly styled under the studio lights, his chest puffed out with the supreme, narcissistic vanity of a man who believed he had successfully conquered the cultural universe. Standing right beside him, her manicured hand draped possessively over his arm, was Scarlett Dupont, the ultra-wealthy heiress of a regional television network, wearing a sheer, million-dollar diamond gown, flashing a sharp, triumphant sneer directly at me. Tristan adjusted the high-frequency microphone, his handsome face contorted into a calculated expression of profound sorrow and righteous anger. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a thick document bearing a stamped forensic laboratory logo, and held it high in the air for every single camera lens to capture. Ladies and gentlemen of the international press, and to my millions of fans watching live across the globe, Tristan's deep, perfectly modulated voice boomed through the massive audio subwoofers, vibrating through my chest like a physical blow. He turned his eyes toward me, eyes that contained no memory of our shared past, no warmth, and absolutely no mercy. They were filled with pure, unadulterated disgust. For the last 4 years, I have quietly protected the identity of this woman, Aria Miller, believing she was a loyal, simple partner. But today, science has forced my hand. I received this certified prenatal DNA diagnostic log from the central lab this afternoon. With a sudden, violent, and highly theatrical movement, Tristan stepped away from the podium, marched directly up to me, and slammed the heavy forensic papers violently against my chest. The documents bounced off my maternity dress, scattering across the polished stage floor at my feet. "Look at the data, Aria!" Tristan roared directly into his lapel microphone, ensuring his voice reached every single live stream channel. "The genetic markers do not lie! You came to my private dressing room yesterday, crying, waving a pregnancy report, trying to trap me into a multi-million-dollar marital asset settlement right before my historic global contract was signed. But I know the truth now. That is not my-san." The words ripped through the auditorium like a physical explosion. Instantly, the live stream chat feeds on the massive projection monitors behind the stage exploded into a chaotic, blinding wall of millions of mocking comments, hate speech, and digital execution warnings directed entirely at me. The paparazzi went completely wild, the blinding white flashbulbs erupting in a frantic sequence that felt like a firing squad. "You are nothing but a faithless, delusional stalker, Aria!" Tristan shouted, stepping closer until his expensive celebrity cologne invaded my breathing space, his face twisted in pure, newly rich arrogance. "You slept with some low-level camera operator from my set, and now you are trying to force a global icon to buy a mansion for your illegitimate child. My mother, Helena Thorne, has already cleared your cheap clothes from my estate and stuffed them into plastic trash bags outside the service gates. Our legal marriage annulment is already processed by the Supreme Court. Take your fraudulent pregnancy and cut out of my industry. You are permanently banned from my sight." Scarlett Dupont let out a cruel, melodic giggle, leaning against his shoulder, her manicured fingers pointing at my simple white dress. "Did you actually think a penniless, boring orphan girl like you could ever belong in the elite tier of high society, Aria? You are dead weight to Tristan's global brand. Go find a welfare clinic to dump your bastard child." My heart did not break. It hardened into a solid, untouchable block of absolute old money ice. I did not flinch under the blinding lights. I did not shed a single tear of humiliation. I slowly reached down, picked up the fraudulent DNA report from the floor, and looked at the forged signatures with an icy, mechanical, and utterly glacial calm that caused Tristan's smug, triumphant smile to slightly falter at the edges. "Tristan," I said, my voice dropping into a quiet, authoritative clarity that somehow cut clean through the thunderous noise of the paparazzi cameras. I looked directly into his bloodshot eyes, my crystal hazel-green eyes flashing with an ancient, untouchable sovereignty that he had never witnessed before. "You should have checked the security encryption of the laboratory mainframe before you purchased this forged report from Scarlett's father. And you should have looked at the master copyright deeds of the global network that is broadcasting your face tonight. Enjoy your media spotlight right now, because your elite celebrity dynasty has exactly until the midnight transition to breathe." Before his tech bro mind could even process the absolute finality of my words, I turned on my heel, leaving the stage behind, and walked calmly down the grand corridor into the freezing midnight rain. They truly believed they had just publicly destroyed a helpless, broke orphan girl on global television. What their fragile, narcissistic minds could never comprehend was that the 5-year humility trial imposed by my late grandfather's ultimate will was expiring at exactly midnight. Tristan Thorne didn't own a single fraction of his global contracts, his fame, or his luxury assets. The entire international broadcasting grid, the satellites above his head, and the entertainment conglomerates beneath his feet were completely owned and leveraged by the Belmont Sovereign Syndicate, the largest, old-money private media monopoly in the Western Hemisphere. And I was Aria Belmont, the sole biological ruler, matriarch, and owner of that entire empire. I stepped into the back of a waiting, midnight black armored luxury sedan that pulled up seamlessly to the curb. The security team, dressed in elite military-grade suits, bowed their heads to the absolute dirt as I entered. I pulled out my secure satellite smartphone, my fingers flying across the custom interface as I bypassed the public communications grid, dialing a maximum priority clearance hotline. "Dominic," I commanded coldly as the encrypted line connected in less than a single millisecond. "The compliance trial is officially terminated. Tristan Thorne has breached the core morality and asset protection clauses of the Master Trust. Revoke his global broadcast licenses immediately. Execute an immediate forensic audit on his media syndicate's offshore accounting directories. I want his entire digital identity completely erased from the global grid before the sun rises." To understand how the most powerful media heiress in the world ended up living as a quiet, submissive, and invisible wife for a toxic, newly rich celebrity, you have to understand the sacred final doctrine of my grandfather, Magnus Belmont. He was a legendary titan whose private trusts protected the central communications grid of the world, yet he loathed nothing more than flashy, unearned vanity. Aria, he had told me inside our ancestral estate before passing the master cryptographic keys of our family monopoly to my hands. The entertainment and financial sectors are overcrowded with golden parasites who wear tailored tuxedos to hide their hollow souls and massive debts. They treat the weak like stepping stones and worship nothing but the illusion of fame. Before you take control of the Belmont Syndicate, you must live among them as an ordinary, penniless worker. Find a man when he has nothing. Watch how he treats you when he believes you have no money, no family, and no leverage to offer him. That is how you locate their true structural flaw. That is how you know when to execute a total liquidation. For 4 long years, I honored his doctrine with absolute, religious precision. I buried my true name behind a multi-layered cryptographic wall, living under the simple name of Aria Miller, a quiet, soft-spoken wife who managed the low-level data files and script-compliant scheduling in the basement office of Tristan's talent agency. When I first met Tristan Thorne, he was a broke, desperate background actor drowning in thousands of dollars of bad debt, weeping in his tiny, rented apartment because major studio directors refused to look at a man with no elite connections. I saw a genuine spark of raw ambition in him, so I chose to become his silent, invisible guardian angel. Using my hidden master clearance at the Belmont Syndicate, I quietly routed multi-million-dollar leading roles and global brand endorsements directly to his desk, creating the illusion that he was a once-in-a-generation talent who had captured the hearts of Hollywood. I literally handed him a global celebrity monopoly on a silver platter, allowing him to take 100% of the public credit, the magazine covers, and the high society fame. But the exact moment the international success became absolute, the humble actor completely vanished. Tristan filled his garage with leased hypercars, bought a multi-million-dollar penthouse he couldn't legally afford, and allowed his toxic mother, Helena Thorne, to move in and treat me like an embarrassing, lower-class maid who was lucky to even wash his shirts. For the last 2 years, they had openly humiliated me, calling me a dull, ambitionless data entry machine who was actively holding back his social ascent into high society. Tonight, I gave him his final compliance test, and he chose destruction with absolute finality on global television. I sat inside the silent, leather-lined interior of the armored sedan, watching the freezing rain drench the glass windows as we sped toward the private skyscraper headquarters of the Belmont Sovereign Syndicate. On the other end of the secure satellite line, the deep, thunderous hum of our central server mainframes echoed through the receiver as Dominic executed my executive wipe commands. "Executing the master media revocation now, Commander Belmont," Dominic reported, his voice vibrating with a cold, lethal level of technical and financial authority. "The cryptographic master deeds for Tristan Thorne's entire broadcast architecture are registered under your private sovereign signature. We have just pulled the remote transmission certificates. As of exactly 4 minutes ago, Tristan Thorne no longer has the legal or technical permission to stream a single frame of content on the international grid." "And what about his $50 million endorsement contract with the Dupont Network, Dominic?" I asked, my emerald eyes narrowing into narrow slits of absolute, unyielding ice as a deep sense of peace settled over my heart. Without our underlying satellite layer, the Dupont Network is a hollow, empty shell. Dominic chuckled dryly, his tone filled with the clinical contempt of a professional executioner. "The Federal Communications Compliance bots and the SEC oversight algorithms will detect the total absence of verified capital in their media accounts in exactly 30 minutes. Their prime broadcasting ticket will be permanently blacklisted. They aren't just facing a studio shutdown, Chairman. They are facing immediate, total material liquidation." "Perfect," I whispered, looking out at the massive, dark silhouette of the city's financial and media district. "Drive us to the central command tower. Tristan wanted a public execution. Let us ensure he receives a public liquidation." The heavy, soundproofed double doors of the VIP green room slammed shut, cutting off the deafening roar of the paparazzi and the blinding sea of camera flashes from the main auditorium. Inside, the luxury suite was a showcase of newly rich opulence. Crystal decanters of aged cognac, custom silk couches, and gold-framed mirrors everywhere. Tristan Thorne threw his tailored white designer tuxedo jacket onto a leather chair, letting out a loud, arrogant laugh that was filled with absolute triumph and supreme vanity. He picked up a crystal glass, pouring himself a generous drink, his eyes flashing with the cold satisfaction of a man who believed he had successfully executed the perfect public liquidation of his past. "Did you see her face, Scarlett?" Tristan sneered, a vicious, narcissistic smile stretching across his lips as he looked at the billionaire heiress sitting on the couch. Aria stood under that white spotlight looking like a pathetic, frozen ghost. She actually believed that carrying my unborn child would give her a permanent legal claim to my $50 million endorsement empire. She thought a broke, nameless orphan girl could drag down my social prestige and force me into an asset settlement. Publishing that forged DNA report was the most brilliant PR move we have ever executed. Scarlett Dupont leaned back into the silk cushions, her manicured fingers twirling her diamond necklace as she let out a cruel, melodic giggle. "It was flawless, Tristan. My father's private media network controlled 70% of the live stream traffic tonight. By the time your pathetic ex-wife steps out into the rain, her name will be completely toxic across every social platform in the country. She is socially erased. Tomorrow morning, When our high society wedding is officially broadcast, the Dupont Network will cement your position as the absolute king of the entertainment sector. A faceless secretary like Aria Miller belongs in the dirt, not in our palace. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the green room burst open with a violent, chaotic crash. Helena Thorne, Tristan's toxic, greedy mother, ran into the room, her face completely pale, her expensive mink coat disheveled as she gripped a silver diagnostic tablet with both hands. Her voice didn't just shake. She was hyperventilating so violently it sounded like she was suffocating on her own panic. "Tristan! Tristan! Look at the broadcast monitors!" Helena shrieked, her high-pitched voice piercing the luxury quiet of the suite like a rusted blade. She violently thrust the tablet into his face, her fingers trembling against the glass. "The live stream feeds! They are dying! Something is systematically tearing down our infrastructure!" Tristan's smug, arrogant smile instantly twitched. He ripped the tablet from her hands, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the data screen. The live active viewer count, which had been sitting at a historic 10 million people just seconds ago, was violently crashing in real time. 9 million, 7 million, 3 million. The digital numbers were dropping like stones falling off a mountain cliff. But it wasn't a normal connection drop. Across every single global broadcast channel, the live video feed of his face was suddenly replaced by a cold, flashing crimson warning screen that read, "Critical Transmission Embargo. Privilege suspended by Supreme Satellite Network." "What the hell is this?" Tristan roared, his handsome face contorting into an expression of pure, unadulterated anger as he slammed his crystal glass onto the marble table, shattering the base. "Call the main control room! Tell the network engineers to reboot the primary fiber optic routers immediately! I am the global icon of this company! They cannot have a local script error during my victory gala." "It is not a script error. Tristan!" A deep, terrifyingly frantic voice yelled from the doorway. Julian, the chief executive of Tristan's talent agency, stumbled into the suite, his designer tie completely ripped open, sweat pouring down his forehead in thick sheets. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life savings vaporize into thin air. Our primary database, the core legal contracts, the endorsement agreements, and our main liquidity routing accounts, they have been completely locked from the outside. A private, military-grade cryptographic sweep hit our agency mainframe at exactly midnight. The sovereign financial clearing codes that back your $50 million Dupont endorsement, they have been permanently revoked. The luxury VIP suite, which had felt like a golden fortress of supreme high society dominance just moments ago, suddenly transformed into a suffocating, terrifying cage. The air inside the room grew heavy and hot as Tristan's newly rich reality began to crack and crumble like a mountain of dry sand under a tidal wave. Tristan grabbed Julian by the collar of his shirt, his chest heaving as a wave of primitive, freezing panic rushed through his veins. "What do you mean revoked? You idiot! Cryptographic firewalls don't just disappear! Who pulled the liquidity certificates? Who has the authority to block a Tier 1 talent agency from the global broadcast grid?" "An anonymous old money conglomerate called the Belmont Sovereign Syndicate." Julian screamed back in absolute, unyielding despair, his eyes bloodshot with terror. "They didn't just crash our servers, Tristan. They executed an emergency 0-hour commercial foreclosure on our entire media network. The international satellites, the actual orbital transponders that carry our television signals across the Western Hemisphere. They aren't public property. Tristan! They are privately owned by the Belmont Family Trust, and they just pulled our transmission license. Vance Agency is completely blacklisted from the digital grid." Scarlett Dupont stood up from the couch so fast her diamond gown caught the edge of the table. Her face turned a sickly, hollow shade of ash gray as her smartphone began vibrating continuously with hundreds of high-priority red alert notifications from her father's banking group. Father just texted me," Scarlett whispered, her voice trembling with a visceral state of raw horror she had never experienced in her entire life. She looked at Tristan like he was a radioactive corpse. "The Dupont Network, our primary stock value has just plummeted 40% in the last 4 minutes. The Federal Communications Commission and the SEC compliance bots have just launched an emergency fraud investigation against our family trust. They found the offshore banking logs. They know my father accepted $20 million of embezzled corporate funds to finance your media campaign. Tristan, the federal prosecutors have already signed the seizure warrants. EC enforcement teams are moving toward our broadcasting tower right now. No, that's impossible. Helena Thorne shrieked, falling to her knees on the expensive Persian rug, her diamond necklaces rattling horribly against each other as she grabbed Tristan's trousers, weeping uncontrollably. You are a global superstar! Tristan! You are the face of high society! They can't investigate us! It's that broke orphan girl, Aria! She must have corrupted our data directories before she ran into the rain. She's trying to sabotage your wedding because she's jealous of Scarlett. Shut your mouth, mother! Tristan suddenly screamed, a cold, breathless realization hitting his chest like a physical steel sledgehammer, stripping the air entirely from his lungs. His mind violently snapped back to the exact words Aria had whispered to him under the humiliating glare of the auditorium spotlight just 20 minutes ago. You should have checked the security encryption of the laboratory mainframe before you purchased this forged report, Tristan. And you should have looked at the master copyright deeds of the global network that is broadcasting your face tonight. Your celebrity dynasty has exactly until the midnight transition to breathe. Aria, Tristan gasped, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped his phone as he stumbled backward against the vanity mirror, shattering a decorative glass tray. She wasn't Aria Miller, the helpless, McCoy assistant who quietly managed his scheduling files in the basement office for 4 years. She was the architect. She knew every single hidden offshore account, every single contract vulnerability, and every single dark transaction he had ever executed to build his fake empire. With sweat-drenched fingers, Tristan grabbed his phone, bypassing the crashing agency servers, and frantically dialed Aria's private, unlisted emergency line. He didn't just wait for the ring. He fell onto his knees against the floor, sobbing uncontrollably into the receiver like a begging dog. The call connected on the exact second ring, but there was no sound of a crying, broken woman shivering in the midnight rain. There was only a deep, heavy, and absolute silence, followed by a voice of pure, untouchable, and imperial dominance that carried the weight of an empress. You have exactly 12 minutes before the morning market compliance grid locks your assets permanently. Tristan, I said, my voice cutting through his phone speaker like a diamond scalpel. Aria! Elena! Please! I beg you! ANS were ME! Tristan shrieked into the phone, pressing the glass against his ear as he crawled across the wet floor of the green room. What did you do to my satellite channels? What did you do to the Dupont contracts? The federal authorities are raiding my agency. My entire career is vaporizing. Aria! Are you doing all of this just because of a stupid press conference? I didn't destroy your career, Tristan. I simply stopped financing your illusion. I laughed softly, a dangerous, freezing sound that caused his blood to instantly run cold. You told the world tonight that a penniless orphan didn't belong in your elite tier of tech royalty. You told 10 million people that my unborn son was a fraud. So go ahead, Tristan. Re-verify your global broadcast licenses yourself before the sun rises. Let us see how much your celebrity status is worth when the Belmont Syndicate deletes your name from the world grid. The line went completely dead. The ticking clock was down to its final minutes, and the parasite had officially run out of air. The air inside the massive, executive broadcasting suite of the Dupont Network had completely lost its premium, high society warmth, transforming into a freezing, suffocating vacuum of pure, unadulterated panic. It was exactly 12 minutes past midnight. Outside the panoramic glass walls, the city's financial district was buried under a heavy, black curtain of pouring rain, the flashes of lightning illuminating the desperate, sweating faces of the people who had tried to execute my social liquidation. Tristan Thorne stood paralyzed in the center of the room, his white designer tuxedo jacket now completely soaked in cold sweat, his breathing ragged and hollow. He stared at his smartphone screen, which was flashing a continuous, rhythmic sequence of critical red alert notifications. His 5-year corporate empire, built on a mountain of stolen credit and superficial media vanity, was collapsing around his shoulders like a glass tower under a Category 5 hurricane. Arthur! You have to stabilize the servers! Tristan suddenly roared, his handsome voice losing all of its smooth, celebrity modulation, cracking into a harsh, terrified shriek as he lunged across the room, grabbing Arthur Dupont, the billionaire patriarch of the media network, by the lapels of his expensive wool suit. Your family owns the broadcasting rights! Your satellites clear the international feeds! Reroute the data packets! Use your offshore banking reserves to bypass the Belmont embargo. I am the global icon of your brand. If my digital footprint is erased tonight, your network will lose hundreds of millions of dollars in stock value before the morning bell rings. Get your filthy, criminal hands off me, you pathetic fraud. Arthur Dupont screamed back, his face contorted into a mask of pure, tyrannical fury as he violently slammed his fist into Tristan's chest, shoving the young superstar backward onto the leather couch. Arthur was hyperventilating, his heavy gold signet ring shaking violently as he threw a stack of newly printed red-stamped federal documents directly onto the table. My network is already dead, Tristan. The Belmont Sovereign Syndicate didn't just bop and jat your personal broadcast license. They executed a total 0-hour commercial foreclosure on my entire family trust. They own the underlying orbital satellites. Tristan! We were just leasing the transmission lines from their central mainframe. We are completely bricked. Scarlett Dupont let out a sharp, hysterical shriek, her manicured fingers violently clawing at her diamond necklace as she watched the massive studio wall monitors turn into a solid, blinding sea of crimson error codes. Her custom $1 million gown now looked like a ridiculous, tragic costume. Father! No! This can't be happening! Scarlett wept, her voice dripping with the visceral terror of an elite heiress who had just realized her generational wealth was vaporizing into thin air. She spun around, pointing a manicured nail directly at Tristan's pale face, her eyes wide with unhinged rage. You lied to us, Tristan. You told me your ex-wife was a penniless, boring orphan girl whose administrative presence was a threat to your high society brand. You used my family's historic media infrastructure to hide your millions of dollars of embezzled talent agency debts. You are radioactive! You are a parasite! Helena Thorne, Tristan's toxic, greedy mother, completely lost her mind. The fragile, narcissistic delusion of her family's aristocratic superiority was permanently shattered. She lunged toward Scarlett, her fingers clawing at the air like a wild animal defending its cage. Don't you dare strike my son, you arrogant girl! Your father's network was already bleeding capital before we even signed the merger contract. You wanted my son's global celebrity image to save your failing legacy. You are the thieves, not us. Stop IT. Bust OF yo, shut UP, Tristan screamed, his face completely pale, his hands tightly gripping his head as the terrifying, crushing reality of his choices hit his chest like a physical sledgehammer. Suddenly, the heavy, reinforced oak double doors of the executive suite were violently thrown open with a powerful, echoing crash that silenced the chaotic screaming of the broken villains. 10 towering, black-suited corporate security tactical officers from the Belmont Sovereign Syndicate marched into the suite in perfect, military-grade formation. They did not look at the investors. They immediately lined the perimeter of the room, their faces completely expressionless, radiating an aura of absolute, untouchable authority. Directly behind them walked Dominic, the senior executive trustee of the Belmont Empire, holding a large, sealed silver briefcase bearing the golden imperial crest of my family's trust. But he did not take the lead. He stepped aside, bowed his head so low his eyes touched the marble floor, and held the door open wide. A rhythmic, confident, and echoing click of premium high heels broke the terrifying silence of the suite. I stepped into the room. The jaw of Helena Thorne literally dropped to the floor, her fingers freezing over her expensive mink coat. Tristan fell backward onto the couch, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and bulging out of his skull as if he had just seen a ghost rise from the grave. I was no longer wearing the wet, cheap white maternity dress from the press conference. I looked absolutely breathtaking, a vision of pure, imperial high society power. My voluminous dark hair cascaded perfectly over my shoulders in rich, glossy waves. I was dressed in a custom-tailored, multi-$1,000 royal black silk blazer suit jacket that radiated untouchable authority. My left hand was gently draped over my stomach, but my posture carried the weight of an unyielding monarch. My emerald eyes were narrow, sharp, and filled with a glacial, sub-zero calm that instantly frozen the breathing of every billionaire in the room. And in my right hand, held delicately between my fingers, was the master digital diagnostic ledger from the central laboratory. The original, unedited cryptographic record of my unborn son's DNA. "Aria!" Tristan shrieked, his voice cracking into a pathetic, terrified squeak as he staggered to his feet, his knees trembling violently beneath his white tuxedo trousers. "What? How did you bypass the building security? Dominic, why are you standing behind this administrative assistant? Shut your mouth, you insignificant parasite!" Dominic's deep, thunderous voice cut through the room like a guillotine. "You are speaking to Commander Aria Belmont, the absolute, sole biological heir to the Belmont Sovereign Syndicate, the matriarch of the global broadcast grid, and the woman who currently owns the master debt of every single media house in this hemisphere." Arthur Dupont felt his knees literally shake. He looked at the diagnostic briefcase, then looked at the imperial crest on Dominic's lapel, and his face instantly lost all of its color, turning a ghostly, horrific shade of white. The Belmont heir. The anonymous 5-year humility trial. It was you? The trillion-dollar communications monopoly? You were living as a low-level compliance scheduler in a basement office? I walked calmly to the center of the executive room, the 10 tactical security officers moving with me in perfect, silent sync. I lifted my hand, sliding the master digital ledger across the table, where it illuminated the screen with a bright, blinding white light. The genetic markers were never unverified. "Tristan," I whispered, my voice carrying a quiet, imperial weight that caused the entire suite to break into a cold sweat. "Yesterday at 3 o'clock, your mother and Scarlett's father paid $50,000 to the head director of the laboratory to alter the digital certificates. You wanted a public media ambush to protect your high society brand, so you broadcasted a fraudulent document to 10 million people live on my network. But you forgot one foundational rule of the asset world, Tristan. The Belmont mainframe records everything." With a sudden, wet thud, the arrogant superstar completely collapsed. Tristan Thorne had dropped from the couch, falling directly onto his knees against the cold marble floor. The global celebrity icon was now crawling through the spilled liquor and debris, reaching his trembling, sweating hands toward my polished leather heels, his face twisted into an expression of pure, raw, and unadulterated cowardice. "Aria! Aria, please! Look at me!" Tristan sobbed, his voice cracking into a desperate, high-pitched whine. Tears were streaming down his pale face, ruining his celebrity presentation. "I was blind! I was an arrogant fool! I didn't know you were the Belmont heir! If I had known who your grandfather was, I would have never allowed my mother to touch your clothes! I would have never signed the annulment papers! We are a family. Aria, that baby boy in your stomach, he is my son! He is the heir to our legacy! Save me, Aria! I beg you! Reapprove my global contracts!" The executive broadcasting suite had officially dissolved into a terrifying, primitive theater of high society warfare, visceral desperation, and absolute psychological collapse. The polished mahogany table, which had been designed to host multi-million-dollar international lifestyle endorsements and media alliances, was now covered in the scattered, torn remnants of the fraudulent DNA reports and the debris of shattered crystal. Scarlett Dupont, the billionaire heiress whose cold, snobbish laughter had echoed across the live stream network just minutes ago, completely lost every single ounce of her aristocratic composure. Her face, usually mask-like and perfect with premium European cosmetics, was now twisted into an unhinged grimace of pure, concentrated venom. She stared down at Tristan Thorne, who was still groveling on his knees in the dirt, clutching the empty air where my silk blazer had been, weeping like a broken, dying animal. With a sudden, violent screech of her high heels against the marble floor, Scarlett lunged forward. She did not care about her delicate, $1,000,000 sheer gown, nor did she care about the 10 armed Belmont tactical security officers watching her with clinical, freezing detachment. She reached down and violently grabbed Tristan by his perfectly styled platinum hair, pulling his head back with a savage force that made him let out a pathetic, high-pitched shriek of agony. "You pathetic, lying, low-class piece of trash," Scarlett shrieked, her voice cracking into a terrifying, hoarse scream that vibrated off the soundproof panoramic glass walls. "You told me you were a once-in-a-generation global icon. You told me your ex-wife was just a stupid, nameless, charity case assistant who was leeching off your brilliant cultural brand. You used my family's historic media reputation and our credit facilities to hide your millions of dollars of embezzled talent agency debts. You scammed us. Tristan, you dragged the entire Dupont Dynasty into your radioactive, criminal ruin." Tristan stumbled backward against the floor as she released him, his hand tightly gripping his bruised cheek, his platinum hair completely disheveled, falling across his forehead in pathetic, sweat-drenched strands. He looked up at her, his eyes bloodshot, bulging with the wild, erratic panic of a trapped rat inside a burning cage. "Scarlett, please, you don't understand," Tristan yelled back, his voice cracking into a desperate, frantic sob as he tried to crawl away from her toward the couch. "I didn't scam anyone! I genuinely built the media brand! I didn't know the master satellite transmission codes belonged to the Belmont Syndicate! Aria never told me!" She hid her entire family lineage from me for 4 long years. She intentionally set a trap to destroy our family. "She didn't set a trap, you arrogant idiot. She gave you a baseline loyalty compliance test, and you proved to be a faithless, narcissistic parasite." Arthur Dupont roared from the other side of the obsidian desk. The elderly patriarch of the media conglomerate looked like he had aged 20 years in a single second. His chest was heaving so violently, his silk tie was completely crooked. He walked over to Tristan, his heavy custom leather shoes stomping directly over the torn papers, and violently kicked Tristan's leather chair aside, sending it crashing violently into the glass window. Arthur turned his back on Tristan, his hands shaking with an absolute state of raw horror as he fell directly onto his knees against the cold stone, looking up at me with a face twisted in pathetic, desperate repentance. "Commander Belmont! Aria, please, hear my plea! The Dupont family was completely deceived by this newly rich fraud. We had absolutely no knowledge of how he and his mother treated you behind closed doors. If I had known he threw your clothes into the mud and insulted your unborn child, I would have personally broken his neck. Please, do not liquidate our primary rolling credit facilities. If our satellite nodes remain frozen, my family will lose every single television station, every single real estate asset we have owned for generations. Do not let us drown because of this vermin." Helena Thorne, seeing the multi-billionaire chairman of the Dupont Network groveling on the floor right next to her, completely lost the final fragments of her sanity. She lunged toward Scarlett, her fingernails clawing at the air like a wild beast defending its territory. "Don't you dare strike my son, you greedy girl! Your father's network was already bleeding capital and drowning in toxic debt before we even walked into this auditorium tonight. You wanted my son's global superstar image to save your failing legacy. You are the thieves, not us! Silence!" Dominic's deep, booming voice cut through the screaming like a lightning bolt, instantly freezing the movements of everyone in the room. The absolute, crushing weight of his authority silenced the chaotic cackle of the broken villains. Dominic stepped forward, turning his attention to me, bowing with absolute, religious reverence. "Commander Belmont, the clock is ticking down to the final seconds before the global market transition. The federal authorities have just breached the lower perimeter of the tower. Your orders have been executed to the absolute letter." I stood at the summit of the room, my hands calmly folded behind the back of my tailored royal black silk blazer, my face completely expressionless, radiating a terrifying, sub-zero aura of sovereign finality. I looked down at the 4 individuals groveling, screaming, and culling each other in the dirt at my feet. "Open the doors, Dominic," I commanded, my voice dropping into a quiet, mechanical calm that made the room feel like a modern execution chamber. Let the law dismantle the rest of their illusion. On the exact second, my command left my lips. The heavy, reinforced mahogany main double doors of the executive suite were violently thrown open for the second time. But this time, it wasn't the private security forces of the Belmont Syndicate. 6 towering, armed federal marshals dressed in tactical gear, accompanied by white-coated forensic investigators from the Federal Communications Oversight Committee, marched into the room. Leading the detail was a senior federal prosecutor, holding a high-priority, red-stamped judicial mandate bearing the supreme crest of the United States District Court. "Federal agents! Nobody move!" the prosecutor announced, his voice slicing through the thick, toxic air of the room like a cold steel blade. He walked directly to the center of the room, completely ignoring the weeping billionaires on the floor, and looked straight at Tristan Thorne. "Tristan Thorne, you are officially under arrest for multi-million-dollar corporate forgery, grand larceny, systemic talent asset embezzlement, and the deliberate falsification of certified medical data on a public broadcasting grid." Tristan let out a loud, horrified shriek, his body convulsing with pure, primitive terror as two massive federal marshals grabbed his chained arms, violently pulling him up from the floor. The heavy, cold steel handcuffs clicked tightly around his sweating wrists with a definitive, metallic snap. "No! No! You can't arrest me!" Tristan screamed, his voice breaking into a pathetic, high-pitched sob as he struggled against the iron grip of the marshals. His expensive white designer tuxedo jacket was violently torn open during the struggle, revealing the sweat-stained fabric underneath. "I am a global icon! I am signing a $50 million contract right now! Ask Arthur Dupont! Ask Scarlett!" "This is a technical misunderstanding. My ex-wife. She manipulated the server logs. She is the criminal, not me." The forensic logs were submitted directly by the Belmont Syndicate mainframe, Mr. Thorne, the prosecutor replied coldly, his face an unyielding wall of legal reality. "Your own administrative database shows a 4-year history of illegal asset transfers used to finance your private luxury vehicles, your penthouse, and your mother's jewelry lines. You didn't build an empire, sir. You built a federal fraud liability." The marshals didn't hesitate. They didn't even allow Tristan to adjust his clothes. They began dragging him brutally across the polished marble floor, his custom leather loafers scraping uselessly against the stone, his chains rattling horribly as he was hauled toward the executive elevator banks like a sack of garbage. "Tristan! Why, son?" Helena Thorne Munche Theo, her expensive mink coat falling off her shoulders, stepping directly into the puddles of dirty water on the floor. But before she could take 3 steps, 2 female federal deputies blocked her path, their faces completely expressionless as they clicked a secondary pair of steel handcuffs around her wrinkled wrists. "Helena Thorne, you are being detained as a primary material co-conspirator to corporate fraud, extortion, and malicious defamation," the deputy announced, forcing her arms behind her back. Helena's face completely deflated, her mouth hanging open in a silent, horrified gasp as she realized she was being stripped of her luxury life forever. Arthur Dupont and Scarlett were not spared either. The forensic investigators immediately began sealing every single computer terminal, every leather briefcase, and every document directory in the room with bright orange federal seizure labels. The Dupont media dynasty was officially frozen, radioactive, and dead before the market could even open its gates. The extraction was deliberately orchestrated to maximize their public social execution. The marshals dragged Tristan, Helena, and the Dupont family down the glass executive elevators, completely visible to the hundreds of corporate workers in the lower offices, before pushing them out through the grand marble lobby of the tower. Outside, the scene was an absolute, blinding sea of flashing lights, roaring sirens, and hundreds of media reporters from every single major entertainment and financial news network in the state. Dominic had leaked the unedited forensic DNA data logs and the forgery audit to the press exactly 20 minutes ago. As Tristan Thorne was pushed out through the heavy revolving glass doors into the cold morning air, the journalists instantly swarmed the perimeter, their cameras capturing every single drop of sweat, every tear, and every stain on his torn white tuxedo. The self-proclaimed global superstar of the entertainment sector was completely exposed to the world public as a pathetic, small-time thief who had tried to frame his pregnant wife. He looked back one last time through the crowd, his eyes desperately searching the upper terraces of the skyscraper. I stepped out onto the grand stone balcony of the 90th floor, looking down at the chaotic circus below. The cold morning sun cast a magnificent, golden glow across my custom royal black silk blazer, and the original, unedited DNA document in my hand caught the light, shining like a beacon of absolute, unyielding justice. My emerald eyes watched his final descent into the back of the dark federal transport vehicle with an icy, untouchable peace. Tristan truly believed that because I chose to live humbly, work quietly in the shadow of my grandfather's memory, and serve his family with silence, I was an easy target to be crushed, humiliated, and thrown out like trash. He forgot the ultimate, sovereign law of the old money universe. Never stomp on the quiet clerk who secretly owns the entire infrastructure you are trying to run. The massive, reinforced oak doors of the federal courthouse in the Southern District of New York slammed shut with a heavy, definitive, and echoing HUD. Inside, the atmosphere was frozen solid with the absolute, uncompromising weight of federal justice. The grand, bloated illusion of Tristan Thorne's global entertainment dynasty had been completely ground into fine, microscopic dust, leaving behind nothing but the raw, bleeding wreckage of his narcissistic greed. Tristan stood behind the dark wooden defense table, his body trembling so violently that the heavy steel shackles around his wrists and ankles rattled against each other, creating a pathetic, metallic sound of total defeat. The custom-tailored white designer tuxedos and the multi-thousand-dollar diamond accessories were completely gone. He was dressed in a coarse, heavy, brilliant orange inmate jumpsuit that scratched against his pale skin. His face, once radiating the smug vanity of a global icon, was now hollow, gray, and permanently deflated by months of absolute, visceral terror inside the federal holding facility. "Tristan Thorne," the federal judge announced, her voice vibrating through the vaulted ceilings of the courtroom with a cold, unyielding authority. She adjusted her glasses, looking down at the massive mountain of digital financial logs and encrypted satellite data submitted by the Belmont Sovereign Syndicate. "This court has completed its comprehensive review of the forensic data networks. You did not simply make an aggressive career move. You deliberately executed a predatory, multi-million-dollar criminal extortion and corporate forgery scheme. You weaponized a fraudulent prenatal DNA document on a public broadcasting grid to socially liquidate your pregnant wife and evade your massive financial liabilities. The law will not tolerate parasites who steal the integrity of others to crown themselves kings." The judge lifted her heavy wooden gavel and slammed it down with a thunderous, echoing crash that shattered the final, remaining fragments of Tristan's soul. "I hereby sentence you to 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary with zero eligibility for early release or parole," the judge decreed without a single ounce of mercy. "Furthermore, under supreme federal asset forfeiture warrants, every single asset under your name, including your frozen offshore talent accounts, your luxury penthouse, and your hypercars, is permanently irradiated to satisfy the massive civil damages owed to the Belmont Sovereign Syndicate. Your co-conspirator and mother, Helena Thorne, is hereby sentenced to 7 years for material complicity, malicious defamation, and criminal asset concealment." This court is adjourned. Tristan went completely hysterical. He let out a loud, high-pitched, and pathetic shriek that sounded like an animal facing execution. He struggled frantically as 2 massive federal marshals grabbed his chained arms, lifting him entirely off his feet. The iron links around his ankles scraped horribly against the hardwood floor as they began dragging him toward the dark holding cells. "Aria! No! Please! Tell them it was a publicity stunt!" Tristan screamed, his voice cracking into a desperate, terrified sob as he looked back at the gallery, tears smudging his pale face. "I built that brand for our future child! I didn't mean to alter the laboratory logs! Aria! Save Emmy! I am your husband!" I stood dead center in the front row of the gallery, wearing a magnificent, custom-tailored dark navy blue executive silk dress that radiated untouched, imperial power. My hands were calmly draped over my lap, and my emerald eyes watched his desperate extraction with an icy, absolute calm. He had treated my silence as weakness, and now the broadcasting system he tried to exploit had permanently deleted his existence from the world. 1 full year has passed since that freezing midnight outside the Grand Press Auditorium when Tristan Thorne flashed a forged DNA report to 10 million viewers, called my unborn son a fraud, and told me to vanish from his sight. The Belmont Sovereign Syndicate has achieved absolute, undisputed dominance over the international broadcasting and satellite communications infrastructure of the entire country. By permanently shifting our multi-billion-dollar media pool to protect honest content creators and ground-level workers, our corporate firewall has become completely unbreachable, commanding over $90 billion in total sovereign assets worldwide. I stood in my magnificent, glass-walled penthouse office at the summit of the Belmont Command Tower, holding a warm porcelain cup of premium black coffee. The beautiful afternoon sun was setting over the Manhattan skyline, casting a warm, golden glow across my dark mahogany executive desk. Standing right next to my secure digital terminal was a beautiful, custom-designed velvet cradle where my 1-year-old baby boy was sleeping peacefully, his tiny fingers curling around a silver blanket bearing our family crest. Dominic walked into the suite quietly, stepping to my side with absolute reverence, and placed a secure, encrypted digital tablet onto the desk. "The annual inmate operational logs have just updated. Chairman Belmont," Dominic said with a respectful, proud smile. I opened the file, reviewing the final status on our legal ledger. Tristan Thorne had just completed his first year at the maximum security federal facility. The global celebrity icon who once bragged about his elite high society status and custom designer wardrobes was now spending 16 hours a day inside the prison's low-end electronic recycling yard. He sits in a dark, concrete corner, wearing heavy rubber gloves, performing the grueling, mind-numbing manual task of stripping rusted copper wires and performing basic, repetitive data entry on ancient monochrome computer terminals. He works frantically under the watchful eyes of armed guards for exactly 12 cents an hour, performing the exact same invisible machine labor he once looked down upon when he threw my clothes into the mud and called his own son an assistant's fraud. I closed the file, looking out at the vast, breathtaking horizon of the city. I felt a profound, beautiful state of absolute peace in my soul. Tristan truly believed that because I chose to live humbly, work quietly in the shadow of my grandfather's memory, and serve his agency with silence, I was an easy target to be crushed, humiliated, and discarded on global television. He forgot the ultimate law of the old money universe. Never stomp on the person who built the satellite network you were trying to run. Never mistake humility for weakness, because the quiet assistant scheduling your scripts next to you today might just hold the master kill switch to your entire dynasty tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Cold Calm Stories 1. If you believe that true integrity always outlasts arrogant parasites, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dive dramatic tales. See you in the next story.